Okay, so welcome to part 2, and we're going to keep going on our journey through this, where we're going to discuss offenders, juveniles, and repeat victimisation. Okay, first we're going to look at offenders. Now, I'm just going to leave this here. I'm not going to open it up because it stuffs it up for YouTube when I upload the lectures if I open up things, but you can have a look at this, and I would really highly recommend that you do go on to the Australian Institute of Criminology and the ABS websites and have a look around, because you will probably use them quite a bit throughout your studies. So when we think about offenders specifically, we can use the site to look at this. They've got really interactive graphs with lots of information. You can download the graphs, change the crime, and have a look at them. So when we're talking about sexual assault, when we think about the talk that we were talking, that parents have to have, we're failing our kids by not having that talk. All right, let's look at the age crime curve and offender age. So it's no surprise that we see young people topping the chart for committing offences, because the late teens to early 20s is the peak age of offending. Teenagers commit more property crime than any other form of crime, and more of it than any other age groups. So from say age 17 onwards, other offences become more prevalent than property offences, but it is mainly property offences. And all this car stealing that's going on is considered to be a property offence because they're stealing the car. Carjacking is an entirely different thing, but just getting the cars and stealing the car is just property. Okay? We've got kids as young as 12 and 13. There were 2 boys up on the Sunshine Coast on Good Friday. I don't know if it was this year or last year, where they stole a car, they rammed 8 police cars, drove the wrong way on the freeway, and they were aged 12 and 13. So they are fairly young in what they're doing. So what do we know? So what we do know is that young people are offending, and much of it is not serious crime. But who are we arresting? Do you think that your level of education makes a difference in your propensity to commit crime? Well, the key points to take away from this are that in 2015-16, 38% of offenders had year 10 or less. And in the 2016 census, 19.7% of Australians had year 10 or less. So when you're comparing those two, it shows that having year 10 or less is a fairly big wad of offenders compared to how many in the general population have only gone to year 10 or not even that far. So the proportion of offenders with year 10 or less is almost double that of the Australian population as a whole. But it's an improvement, because in 2007 it was 46% of offenders that had year 10 or less. So this tends to suggest that people with less education are more likely to commit crime. And this is true across both genders. I'll just see if I can move that out the way. All right, so you can have a really good look at this. So look at the number of males and females year 10 or less. As you get down, completed TAFE, the girls tend to go up a little bit again, but completed university, the number goes way down. Okay, so the higher your education, the less likely you are to commit crime. So even just completing year 11 or 12, even going to TAFE or university and not completing it, still is a protective factor. I don't know what it is about girls doing TAFE. That's a bit interesting. Oh, and this was done through Watch House detainees in 4 of the big cities in Australia. I'll move to the next screen. Okay, what about employment? So if education has an effect, does employment have an effect? Well, it seems that retired people are less likely to commit crime, as are those who are studying. Looking for work, there's the big one there, okay? Those people who are looking for work are more likely to commit acts of deviance or offences, but that can also be driven by their levels of education. Okay, so employed but not currently working, part-time And full-time employment seems to be a little bit high as well. But it is this group here that are actually actively looking for work who are most likely to be involved in crime. What about where people live? Again, I'll see if I can move this out the way. Oh, wrong one. I want to move that one. I want to move this one. Okay. So, does home ownership affect you? Where do these young kids that are committing crime and offending, where do they live? Well, some of them will be couch surfing, some of them will be on the streets, and there'll be a distinct lack of parental involvement. Okay, so if we look at this, you can see there that people who own their own place or rent their place are not likely to get involved in offending. Okay, whereas the numbers go down when you're not living in stable accommodation. Sorry, so they're the ones who are offending. So low level of education is associated with unemployment and underemployment, and these people who are the offenders usually have school dropout or low levels of education, socioeconomic disadvantage, disorganised living arrangements, and all of these are risk factors for offending. Okay, so own your own home or live at somebody else's place, then you are less likely to be offending. All right, youth crime in Queensland. This is all from QPS, so Queensland Police Service. This is not national. So it's limited to state police. It may reflect changes in reporting, not necessarily real crime. There are no regular national statistics, so we rely on episodic reports. Instituting a biennial national youth survey of self-reported victimisation and offending would be an invaluable resource, and alcohol and illicit drug use are often closely related to offending. However, the use of illicit drugs is declining, with cannabis use most frequently, so 9.1% in the last year. That can change as different drugs come onto the scene. So age, again, we've got this bell curve, the age crime curve, okay? It is inversely related to criminality. Younger people are more likely to be involved in crime, and this has been going on since the 1830s when it was first observed. Again, we can see that the girls are quite low, whereas the boys are quite high, and then when you add them together you get this massive peak, and look what age group it is, 15 to 19. Okay, females much lesser offenders, and this covers around 60,000 crimes, as you can see here, that were committed in 1 year. And it's remained stable for nearly 200 years. So that's really hard to believe, but this is what's happening. Age is inversely related. So what is this relationship between age and crime? So it's the most well-documented and contentious of all criminological findings. The aggregate level data is gained by grouping all offenders by juveniles into one graph. Can you make individual level conclusions from this? Well, not really, because you can't say one individual is likely to be a criminal as they are a teenager, full stop. It just doesn't happen, because we know that there are an awful lot of teenagers out there who do not commit crime. The vast majority don't commit crime. The vast majority of crime is committed by a very, very small group of individuals. So is the peak in the age crime curve a function of active offenders committing more crime, or a function of more individuals actively offending in the peak years? How many of you knew kids in high school who were always in trouble, and how many of you knew kids who only got into trouble a couple of times? We can't tell that from this previous graph. We can't tell that from that graph. It doesn't give you that information. It just gives you a number of offences. So it's not really giving us the full picture. All right, so this is quite old. I wasn't able to find a newer graph to replace this with, So we've got this one for now, we'll use it. This is a breakdown by state. So if we look at the states, New South Wales has the highest amount of contact with juveniles. Okay, so 28% of the contact in New South Wales is with juveniles. Can anybody tell me what's missing from this graph? What's missing is the Northern Territory. If you were to put the Northern Territory in there, I think it would look vastly different because they have a very, very big problem in the Northern Territory with juvenile crime. So it's not there. Queensland's sitting there in about 3rd place, just ahead of South Australia. WA is quite low considering that they do seem to have a juvenile problem over there as well. But as I said, this is from 2006 and 7, so it may have changed since this was done. So this was the most up-to-date stats that I was able to find about Queensland Indigenous youth offenders. Now these are for offences only. The actual number of offenders is smaller. And after the 15 years age group, 15 to 19, the rates have not markedly increased. So that's the number of offences that happened. You can see that for the 10 to 14s, it actually came down a bit, as it did for the 15 to 19s. Only by 6 there, and only by, 12, 13 there. So it's not coming down much, but slightly less offences. And these are the numbers for the non-Indigenous youth groups. So the rate goes up markedly in the 15 to 19 age group when you compare it to the Indigenous kids in the 15 to 19. Got 3,261 there, and on the next screen we've got 10,064. A little bit lower on the 10 to 14 years, not that much, and it did come down for the 15 to 19s, but the non-Indigenous youth are offending at a much higher rate. So again, I tried to find a more recent graph than this one to put in here, but I wasn't able to find one. So we just go with what we've got at the moment. But this is when young kids commit a crime and they're put into kiddie jail or detention. So here we do have the Northern Territory included. And as you can see, while across the board, the figures have either stayed, quite static, as they have in New South Wales, Queensland, WA, and even the whole of Australia in the Northern Territory, they're just outstripping everybody else in the number of kids being put into detention. We will talk about it briefly at some stage during your courses, the Dondale Detention Centre in Darwin. But if you are interested in juvenile incarceration, I would strongly recommend that you try and find the Four Corners program that was done about it. It should be available on YouTube or on the ABC site itself. If you can't find it, I'm pretty sure I've got it on slides somewhere and we can get it for you. Frightening stuff to watch. Again, this is a bit old. Trying to get some updated graphs can be a little bit problematic at times, but this is where we break everything down again into rates per 100,000 so that we make sure that we have the consistency. So we're looking at this line here at Indigenous kids, and this line here we're looking at non-Indigenous kids. Non-Indigenous kids 17.6 per 100,000, Indigenous kids 420.4. That is a huge, massive difference. So we need to think about why that difference is so big. How can we explain that this is okay and is this warranted? But it is what it is that we've got, but is it warranted that we're locking up Indigenous kids at such a high rate? And what is the specific deterrent effects of custody on juvenile offenders? Absolutely none. It's supposed to be a specific deterrent to stop them from going and offending again. Does it work? Well, this is about how long they went before they were reappearing in court and getting into trouble again. Okay, so why do we keep doing it if it's not working? It fails. But some of them actually do want to be in detention. Some of these kids are very happy to break the law and get put into detention. Why do you think they might want to do that? Well, the reason is that when they're in detention, they've got stability. They've got food, they've got a roof over their head, they've got people who care. So, unfortunately, some kids like to be in custody. We also have this growing problem with young children stealing cars and doing some pretty horrific stuff in Queensland at the moment. And they're dying. 4 in 1 kid in Townsville, another one in Brisbane. These kids are dying from the crimes that they're committing. And the Queensland government currently has a policy of not putting them into detention. They don't want children locked up. So it's a very vexing question that we have to ask. If locking them up in juvenile detention doesn't work, what else can we do to protect the community and to protect them from themselves? We just don't seem to have those answers at the moment. Repeat victimisation and hotspots. So the time course of repeat domestic violence. So what does it mean if you are repeatedly victimised? Sometimes people who have their homes broken into have it happen again quite soon after. A victim of domestic violence is really highly likely to be victimised again. The longer it goes on, the more time there will be between calls to the police. So this is ground zero. They've had the call. Some of them, it's the next day and they're being called again. So repeat domestic violence. Some of them go out for a fair time, but many of them, it's fairly quickly after the first incident happens that they have been re-victimised. Okay, repeat victimisation isn't just about domestic violence. It can happen all the time with people who may have had their house broken into, and within a very short time, even 24 hours to 48 hours, it happens again. So this is what's called hotspots. So the red spots are the high crime density spots. So the ones you can see the numbers, and you can see the darker the colour it gets. It's really a burnt orange rather than a red, but they are your high density crime spots. This is in Sydney, as you can see. They're areas of repeat victimisation. So we can look at these crime hotspots to see what we can learn about the offenders. Is this telling us that the offenders don't travel, so they just hit the same spots over and over? So there is quite a lot of data out there to support this idea of repeat victimisation. These hotspot graphs, the Queensland Police Service do them as well. You can go onto their site and you can put in your own street or neighbourhood, and you can find where you live and have a look at the hotspots for how much crime is happening there. So just as there's a small number of repeat offenders, there's repeat victims. And once you've been a victim once, your level of risk increases. So if you are a victim of domestic violence or even your car being broken into, you're more likely to be a repeat victim. And one of the reasons that people can be repeat victims with having their homes broken into is that someone will break in, they'll steal stuff. Maybe they couldn't take everything that they wanted the first time, so they'll come back fairly quickly because they know that there's more stuff there that they wanted to get that stuff. Or they might wait for a month or so knowing that you're going to go and get your insurance company to replace some of the bigger ticket items, perhaps like TVs, and they know that if they go back about a month later, you're going to have all new stuff. So you are going to be good to hit up again. Okay, but it's important to remember this repeat victimisation contributes to hotspots. It's greatest in the period straight after, and it can result from certain types of people or premises having characteristics that make them inherently attractive to criminals. So this can draw attention to aspects of lifestyle or environmental characteristics of an address. So for instance, if you have an address or a house that's got a great big hedge up or a great big metal fence across the front that's solid so that nobody can actually see the house from the street, those environmental characteristics can make that house be open to being robbed because it's too enclosed. The robbers can't be seen from the street, so there is no prevention of them being on the premises. And that's actually something in situational crime prevention that we're going to do down the track in this trimester. However, victimisation itself makes re-victimisation more likely. This can be caused, as I said, some offenders will return to take things they overlooked the first time, as in a burglary. So we've robbed you, but oh, I couldn't carry the last of the stuff I wanted, so I'll go back a second time. Or in the case of domestic violence, that the person perpetrating that domestic violence will find that their needs are met by using that violence against their partner. The offenders might tell their friends and their mates of the opportunities at a certain house or a certain location, so different people may go to do the robbery. And the first incident can make the victims appear more vulnerable, and that is the time that they're going to get hit and robbed, is when they are very vulnerable. Okay, so the take home from today, what has been happening in Australia around what is happening, who are the victims, the offenders, and the types of crime. You're going to need all this sort of stuff when you start to write papers and reports for uni. If you have to write reports in the workforce and things like that. So you need to know how to read them and think about the data. Why can we see changes? What could account for these changes? Okay, so like I said, familiarise yourself with the Australian Institute of Criminology site and the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I've given you some sources here that you don't necessarily need so much for this course because there's no specific academic essays being written, but it never hurts for you to go and look at these places and learn about referencing. You will need that for some of your subjects. You'll certainly need it for an essay for forensic psych next trimester. So you need to make sure that you're across that now. All right, that ends part 2. A lot of stats, but we're done with the stats and the methods and everything. So next week we're going to be discussing street crime, and from there we'll look at some different parts of crime, crime prevention, psychology, sociology. There's a whole lot coming up that is a lot more interesting than stats. They are a necessary evil that we just have to get through. Thanks for staying with me. I hope you haven't fallen asleep, needed coffee before you started, and we will talk in class on Friday. Bye.